we needed to make sure that people with intellectual disabilities and families were part of this convention. We found in the early days of negotiation that the voice of people with intellectual disabilities wasn't as strong as some of the other voices. It tends to be easy to look at things from other perspectives. So we need Braille, we need sign language, we need ramps. We know our issues are a little bit more complicated than that. We also know that we need to articulate our wants, our needs, our issues in our own ways. And we had to make sure that voice of people with intellectual disabilities was there. So with the help of Inclusion International, they pulled together an international group of self-advocates who could come to New York and tell their story, put their story in their words, and tell governments what their lived experience is. So we have, I'll just share a couple of stories. A young man from, it's actually not so young, Robert Martin from New Zealand, spent most of his life living in an institution. He, with a great deal of bravery and a great deal of courage, shared that story to governments. What it was like for him to live most of his life in an institution. What the abuse he experienced, the isolation he experienced, and how horrible that had been in his life. He also shared about getting out and what that meant to his life, and that he's married, and he owns his own home, and he has a job, and he has 2 cats, and he lives on his own. He needs support from family and from friends, but he lives with his wife in the house that they own, and they live their life together. We have in the front here a woman from Panama. Her name is Heide. She is first and foremost a poet. She is a writer. She is an artist. And she spoke about issues of having her voice heard, about the importance of families being there and supporting her, but that also she wants to go into the doctor on her own and have her own conversation with the doctor. She might want to talk with her family about some of that information afterwards, but she wants to have control over those situations. She also spoke about the issue of poverty and what it's like to live in poverty and have a disability. In the front beside Heide, we have a young woman from Lebanon named Mia. And Mia was amazing in her speech on inclusive education. And Mia talked about how when she was a little girl, she was registered for school to go to her regular neighborhood school, and how the teacher said, "We're sorry, Mia, you can't come to school here. You're never going to learn how to speak French. You don't belong in this classroom." So Mia's parents registered her in the local Arabic school, and Mia shared that story in Arabic, in English, and indeed in French, because she did eventually learn how to speak French. It's one of the main languages in Lebanon. Of course she needs to learn to speak French, and of course she could. We also have in the back, it might be a bit harder to see, I'm noticing there's some shadows, Quincy. And Quincy is a self-advocate from Zambia, which is in Africa. And before Quincy came to participate in the convention, he'd never really been a leader before. He'd never really spoken up on issues important to him. And we'd been working with him, and he came to New York, and he talked a lot about the importance of employment and what it means to him to have a job. He talked as well about the importance of his family, the support he gets from his brother. And one of the most interesting things about the convention was the impact it had on Quincy. And Quincy went back to Zambia and is now one of the leaders in creating a self-advocacy voice throughout Africa. He has become empowered by sharing his story, by being given an opportunity to speak and to lead and to have his voice heard. We also knew that the convention had to have the voice of families. It couldn't just be about individuals, because we know for many people with significant support needs, it is their families, it is their friends who bridge their life into the community, who help realize their rights. And this was a really difficult discussion to have. I've joked a lot in the development of or when I talk about the development of the convention, that I'd expected there to be tension, sort of difficulties between civil society groups and government. I had not expected the tension amongst disability organizations, and there was a lot of it. We had different opinions, we had different views, we had different priorities, and we had a different mindset. And one of the major issues we had to confront was the issue of families. We had a lot of very articulate men and women with disabilities in New York who would say to us, you just bring people with intellectual disabilities to New York and we will empower them and they can speak. You as a family member have no right to be here. This convention is not for you, it is not for your voice. So we have a couple of brave families who are not shy to back away from things. And we invited a Canadian family, Rebecca Biani. I'm not sure if any of you have met her before, and her mom Sue, an American woman whose name is Sue as well, and her son Charlie to come to New York. We'd been involved in very difficult discussions about decision making and how do we support people to make decisions in their lives and have those decisions respected. And Sue had been front and foremost in those discussions. And again, a real attack saying, you don't belong here. You need to bring your son here and let him speak. And so Sue brought Charlie to New York. And Charlie doesn't speak the way the rest of us speak. He doesn't speak at all. He articulates himself in very different ways. And without Sue and her family to help articulate Charlie's wants and needs and wishes and desires, Charlie's left in the dark. So we brought Charlie, and we were having a discussion on the convention amongst disability organizations and governments who were there. And Sue invited Charlie to tell everyone what he thought of the convention. And there was a long, awkward silence. And she said, I know these things are important to Charlie, because I know Charlie. So here are the things that are important for Charlie. But Charlie has no individual voice that others understand easily. So Sue needs to help that. Similarly, with Rebecca Biani and her mom Sue, to talk about the important role her family plays. And Rebecca delivered a presentation to the United Nations with her mom Sue simply being her voice. But it's Rebecca's ideas and thoughts. And that helped us really demonstrate that this has to be a convention that is relevant to everyone. Our colleague Robert from New Zealand often talked about, this can't be just a convention about me. It has to be about my friends who are not in the room. It has to be about my friends who don't have a voice the way I have a voice. So by having that participation, by having that lived experience and those voices of self-advocates and those voices of families, we really developed a new understanding in this convention. And that's another reason why this convention is really different. It understands disability differently. As I mentioned earlier, it really sees disability as a set of barriers. Disability is what's outside of us that makes things inaccessible, that makes us excluded. And the convention is firmly rooted in that perspective and gives us a tool to drive that change throughout the world. It also understands that rights are made real in our communities. It isn't enough to just say, I have a right to education, to hold up that right. We all know how hard that is to claim in our communities, because it's our communities that make those rights real. That right might exist, but it's not being realized until we look at what's required to make that right meaningful. I'd mentioned there's the explicit social development dimension, and what we ended up with basically is a roadmap. It's a map that helps governments, that helps communities understand how they can make a difference. A colleague of mine was giving a presentation not too long ago, and she said, you know, this is our orientation manual. If anyone has ever wanted to know what we need to build an inclusive and accessible Canada, you got to read the convention, because it is all in there, what it would take to make sure that everyone's fully included.